Now that we have a good understanding of networking and storage within vSphere, we're now going to explore some of the other features we can enable on our cluster. And the first of those is vMotion. vMotion is what allows us to move virtual machines from one host to another without having to shut down or interrupt the guest OS in any way. I regularly do this with terminal servers where users are actively using the virtual machine and they don't notice. If you're looking really closely, you might see one ping that gets delayed or even dropped, but that is the limit of the end user experience in a properly configured vMotion setup. So the first thing we need to do on vMotion is we need to configure a vmkernel NIC, which is enabled for vMotion support. Now, how you do this depends entirely on your environment. You might want to use an existing vmkernel port if you are short of network adapters. You might want to dedicate a specific physical adapter to vMotion. However, actually a lot of the time you won't, because you're probably not doing vMotion all that often. So actually allocating one dedicated NIC to it is possibly a bit of a waste. But if you have the spare NICs, you might want to put it onto its own dedicated NIC to reduce the impact on other services at the time you are running a vMotion process. So I'm going to take the existing vmkernel port that I've got here, edit settings, and I'm going to enable vMotion on it. Okay. Now, with vSphere 5 and above, we added support for multipath vMotion. So you can also configure multiple vmkernel ports on each of your hosts, and it will split the vMotion traffic across all of those vmkernel ports. But for this, I'm just using the one. We'll go to our other host as well. We'll edit this one, and we'll say vMotion. And now, both of my vmkernel ports on both hosts are configured for vMotion traffic. I'll just start up my Windows 10 VM here. And we can see it's running on the host ending 192.168.42.102. Whilst that VM is just starting up, we'll just talk about some of the other requirements of vMotion. Both hosts need to have access to the storage on which the VM is stored. And this is why I've left it till now start looking at this. You need to have shared storage configured, because when the virtual machine moves, it only moves which host it is running on. It cannot move the storage at the same time. There is something called storage vMotion, which allows us to move the storage without interrupting the virtual machine. However, we can't do both at the same time. We have to do them one at a time. So when we move the virtual machine from one host to another, the host needs to be able to see the storage. And the storage needs to understand that it is the same storage on both hosts. Also, the network needs to be configured on both machines. So if we take a look at our host, we can see I've got VM network there. It's called VM network. On the other host, it's also called VM network. But if this was mismatched, we wouldn't necessarily be able to move the VM between the hosts. Now, more recent versions of vSphere do give us options to get around that, but I recommend when you're creating your VMware port groups, create them the same on all of your hosts, and it is case sensitive. If that was a lowercase n, then vSphere would treat it as a different port group and would not be able to move seamlessly between them. So let's go and take a look at our Windows 10 VM. We'll open up the web console for it. We'll just log into the virtual machine. So this is just the Windows 10 virtual machine that's running inside my host. And what we'll do, we'll just set off a couple of things going here. So we'll ping 8888 minus T. There we go. We'll set that pinging, and I'm just going to open up mail there. I'm just opening up a couple of apps just to make the point that this VM remains alive as we are doing this. So we can see we've got a couple of apps running there. We've got these pings going. So let's now close that. And now I'm going to right click on the VM. I'm going to say migrate, change compute resource only. Now we do have the option here to change both compute resource and storage. As we'll see later on, all it does is it does a compute move and then a storage move. It doesn't do them at exactly the same time. And we'll see more on that when we get to that with storage vMotion shortly. I'm going to choose where we're moving it to. So it's currently running on 102. I'm going to move it to 101. Let's see compatibility checks succeed. And select network. Now you'll see it's matched VM network there. Now I said, of course, before, these days vSphere does give us options to get around mismatches between the hosts, but I do recommend you keep them consistent, and you'll see why as we move on to the other cluster features. So that's been matched up automatically. Choose a vMotion priority. This is exactly what it sounds like. How much priority are we going to give this process? It defaults to high priority. We're just going to leave it on that. That's what you'll normally do. And if we take a look at the tasks, we can see it's relocating that virtual machine. I'm going to open up the web console on that machine. And we can see ping's still going ahead. Everything's still running on there. We can still use it. But we've just lost the console. We lost connection to the remote console there because we were connected to it on host 2 and now it's moved to host 1. So we need to relaunch the remote console on host 1. And we can see it's still there, running away. Our pings are still going. All absolutely fine. So that's vMotion. We also have storage vMotion.